It's not every day you see an institution that claims to protect and serve completely lose its mind on live TV. But that's exactly what just happened. The moment Zohran Mamdani introduced his new accountability bill, a bill that simply asks the police to follow the same basic standards every other public institution lives under, the police union didn't just object, they exploded. Threats, panic, performative outrage, wild claims about war on police. Everything except actual facts. And the question almost nobody is asking is, why? Why would a union explode over transparency? What are they so afraid the public might finally see? This story isn't just about one bill. It's about power. It's about who has been protected for decades, and who has been paying the price. If you want to understand why this meltdown matters, and what it reveals about America's justice system, stay with me. The moment the police union stepped up to the podium, you could feel it, the tension, the defensiveness, the raw nerves. It wasn't the calm, measured tone you'd expect from an institution that claims to represent discipline and order. No, this was something different. Something emotional. Something fragile. Within seconds of Zohran Mamdani announcing his accountability bill, the union leadership launched into a performance that looked less like a press conference and more like an emergency broadcast from a crumbling regime. They called the bill an attack. They called it dangerous. Some union representatives went even further, suggesting that Mamdani was putting officers' lives at risk, a phrase they now deploy so frequently it's practically become punctuation. Interviews on local radio stations turned into full-blown panic sessions. Social media pages filled with dramatic warnings, ominous graphics, and statements that sounded more like political ads than union communication. You could almost see the sweat forming under the collar. What's fascinating, though, and what the public immediately picked up on, is how disproportionate the reaction was. Because if you actually read Mamdani's bill, it's not a radical overhaul. It doesn't defund anything. It doesn't dismantle anything. It doesn't criminalize officers. The bill simply establishes basic transparency standards, the kind every accountable public institution already lives under: independent review processes, clearer documentation of use of force incidents, and limits on internal union arbitration practices that have allowed misconduct cases to quietly disappear. Yet the union reacted as if someone had just threatened to burn their entire organization to the ground. And that's the point. Their overreaction reveals something far deeper than policy disagreement. It exposes institutional insecurity. When a system is confident in its practices, it doesn't fear transparency. When a system is healthy, it doesn't melt down at the idea of oversight. But when a system knows, internally, quietly, privately, that accountability could expose years of unaddressed issues, that's when you see the panic. And this panic isn't new. New York has seen it before. Chicago has seen it. Minneapolis has lived through it in real time. Every time there's even a whisper of reform, unions go on the offensive, accusing critics of being anti-police, soft on crime, or putting communities in danger. It's a pattern, almost like a script. One triggered not by the content of reforms, but by the possibility of losing control over the narrative. Remember the NYPD union's meltdown in 2020 after the repeal of 50A, the law that had kept officer misconduct records hidden? They said it would destroy policing. It didn't. In Chicago, when civilian oversight expanded, the union claimed morale would collapse. It didn't. In Minneapolis, any attempt to review union arbitration rules has been met with apocalyptic warnings. None of them materialized. So when you see today's meltdown, don't view it as a reaction to Mamdani alone. View it as the latest chapter in a long history of gatekeepers panicking whenever the public asks for basic information. This opening moment matters because it sets the emotional stakes of the entire story. If the union had responded calmly, if they had said, "Let's review it. Let's work together. Let's modernize policing responsibly," then we'd be having a very different conversation. But they didn't. They escalated, dramatized, and attacked. And that tells you everything you need to know about what's coming next. Because the real question isn't why did they react this way? The real question is, what are they afraid accountability might reveal? And that is exactly where the story becomes much bigger, not just about one bill, but about how power protects itself. Before we get lost in the noise, the outrage, and the war on police headlines the union is trying to manufacture, let's pull the camera back and focus on something simple. What does this bill actually do? Because the gap between the policy itself and the reaction to it is so wide, it tells a story all by itself. At its core, Mamdani's accountability bill is built around one idea, an idea so modest, so basic, that it's almost embarrassing that it has to be legislated in the first place. Public servants who wield state power should be transparent and answerable to the public. That's it. The bill is not a punishment mechanism. It's not anti-police. It's not a political hit job. It's a framework for oversight, nothing more, nothing less. Let's break it down in plain English. First, the bill introduces independent review of misconduct cases. Not review by colleagues, Not review by union-appointed arbitrators, but by external bodies that aren't financially or politically tied to the department. That's standard practice in dozens of democracies around the world. And in Colorado, after the 2020 reforms, independent oversight became a cornerstone of their approach to reducing repeated misconduct. And guess what? It didn't destroy policing. It made it better. Second, the bill seeks to limit one of the most controversial systems in American law enforcement, the arbitration loophole. In New Jersey, for example, journalists uncovered that officers fired for serious misconduct were reinstated more than half the time through union-driven appeals. New York isn't far behind. Mamdani's bill doesn't abolish appeals. It simply ensures those appeals aren't overseen by union-friendly insiders who overturn decisions behind closed doors. Again, accountability, not punishment. Third, it strengthens use of force reporting. Why? Because right now, in too many departments, incidents either go unreported, underreported, or buried in internal paperwork. Transparency protects civilians, but it also protects good officers from being lumped in with the bad. This is why many reform states, from California to Massachusetts, have adopted similar reporting standards. It's not radical. It's responsible governance. When you put all that together, what you get is a bill designed not out of hostility, but out of fairness. Fairness to the public. Fairness to victims. Fairness to officers who do their jobs honorably. Because when a department lacks transparency, everyone loses, especially the people trying to uphold the law with integrity. And that's why ordinary citizens support this. Especially communities that have dealt with misconduct for years with nowhere to turn. They are not asking for vengeance. They are asking for the same thing we expect from teachers, doctors, judges, even the DMV, basic accountability. When nearly every major poll in the last 3 years shows overwhelming public support for increased police oversight, including support from police families themselves, it's clear this isn't an extremist idea. It's mainstream. So when you look at the bill objectively, it becomes obvious. This is calm policy. Measured policy. Data-supported policy. It mirrors reforms already implemented in states across the country, many of which are red, blue, and everything in between. If anything, New York is late to the party. Which raises the real question. If the bill is this reasonable, if the public wants it, if other states are already doing it, then why did the police union melt down like someone had just threatened their entire existence? Because that's where the story stops being about policy and starts being about power. If you want to understand why the police union reacted like a cornered animal, you have to understand one thing first. Police unions are not like other unions. They are not the same as teachers' unions or transit unions or sanitation unions. They operate in a completely different universe, with different rules, different privileges, and a level of political power most institutions could only dream of. For decades, police unions have been some of the most influential political actors in American cities. They negotiate contracts that shield their members from discipline. They use their budgets to endorse candidates from both parties. And they leverage fear of crime, fear of public backlash, fear of chaos, to pressure mayors, governors, and even prosecutors into giving them what they want. They are, in many ways, the quiet political machine behind urban policing itself. And one of their strongest weapons is arbitration, a process that takes misconduct cases out of the public eye and puts them into a private, union-controlled system. Think about the numbers. Studies from major cities like Philadelphia, Chicago, and Minneapolis show that between 45% and 70% of officers fired for misconduct eventually get reinstated. Not because they were innocent, but because contract language, loopholes, and union-backed arbitrators overturned the decisions. That's the machine at work. This matters for two reasons. First, it allows misconduct to recycle through departments, eroding public trust. Second, it reinforces the perception, often accurate, that police unions are untouchable. They exist above the rules everyone else lives under. Now at the financial layer. And this is where the picture becomes even clearer. Police unions aren't just defending reputations, they are defending money. Overtime budgets worth millions. Pension systems that guarantee lifetime earnings. Legal defense protections that shield officers even in cases of serious misconduct. When an officer is disciplined, demoted, or removed, it threatens more than just a job title. It threatens the entire financial ecosystem unions have built. Overtime spikes that inflate pensions are contract clauses guaranteeing raises regardless of performance are paid leave during investigations are union-funded legal teams fighting every consequence. Accountability is not just a moral threat. It's an economic threat. And here's the part the unions don't want you to notice. Political leverage is their strongest currency of all. When an elected official proposes reform, unions can respond in ways that ordinary citizens can't. They can withdraw endorsements. They can fund challenges. They can run attack ads. They can slow down internal cooperation with City Hall. They can even, and this has happened, stage unofficial slowdowns in policing to pressure political leaders. This isn't a conspiracy. It's documented history. In 2014, After Mayor Bill de Blasio criticized police handling of protests, NYPD union leaders publicly turned their backs on him at a funeral. In Chicago, unions waged political war against mayors who tried to limit their arbitration power. In Los Angeles, unions spent millions to influence ballot measures on policing oversight. So when Zohran Mamdani presented a bill that threatened even a piece of this machinery, the backlash wasn't about the bill's content. It wasn't about officer safety. It wasn't about public safety. It was about power. Because once accountability enters the conversation, the old leverage starts to crack. Suddenly, unions can't guarantee protection in misconduct cases. Suddenly, mayors aren't as intimidated. Suddenly, the public gets a window into processes that have been hidden for decades. That's the real threat. And that's why the meltdown was immediate, emotional, and loud. Because the meltdown wasn't about the bill, it was about losing control. And once you understand that, the next question becomes unavoidable. When you step back from the noise, the press conferences, the angry union statements, the political theater, you start to see a much bigger conflict unfolding. This isn't just about one bill. This isn't even just about policing. This is about a fundamental struggle that has played out in America for generations. Ordinary people demanding justice, while institutions built to serve them resist even the smallest amount of transparency. And you can feel that tension everywhere. Look at the last decade of American history. Think about the moments that broke public trust: Eric Garner in Staten Island, Laquan McDonald in Chicago, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, George Floyd in Minneapolis. In nearly every case, the initial official story didn't match what the public eventually learned. Why? Because information was withheld. Reports were edited. Footage was delayed. Evidence was locked behind union contracts and internal reviews. And every time the truth came out, people asked the same question: how many more cases never saw the light of day? That's what creates distrust, not policing itself, but the idea that the system is designed to protect itself before it protects the public. And here's where the generational divide becomes impossible to ignore. Younger Americans, especially Gen Z, aren't buying the old stories anymore. They grew up with smartphone footage, live-streamed arrests, and a digital archive of incidents that previous generations never had access to. They expect transparency. They expect accountability. They expect public institutions to answer to them, not the other way around. This isn't radical, it's cultural reality. But for many communities, especially communities of color, this isn't a new conversation. They've lived through decades of unaccountable policing, surveillance, stop and frisk, over-policing, underprotection, and endless unanswered misconduct complaints. They know what it means when institutions close ranks. They know what it costs when justice depends on someone else's discretion. This is why Mamdani's bill resonated so quickly. Because it wasn't selling a dream, it was acknowledging a truth people already felt in their bones. But let's be honest, pushing for this kind of change in American politics is rare. And it's rare because politicians, even the ones who talk about reform, are often afraid of police unions. Not afraid of losing votes. Afraid of losing cooperation. Afraid of being branded anti-police. Afraid of being targeted in union-backed campaigns. Afraid of the headlines that unions can generate overnight. And so, for decades, reform proposals have been watered down, delayed, or buried entirely. Mamdani didn't do that. He stepped directly into the fight. And that alone makes this moment bigger than a single bill. Because at its core, this chapter of the story is about the working class, the people who pay the taxes, who call 911, who walk the streets, who live with the consequences of institutional decisions they never get to vote on. It's about the belief, a belief so basic that it should be beyond question, that public servants should serve the public, not protect their own power structures. And if you listen closely, you'll notice something changing. People are no longer afraid to say that the system needs reform. They are asking harder questions. They are refusing to accept "just trust us." They are recognizing that transparency isn't a threat, it's a right. Which brings us to the real turning point. If the people are demanding accountability, and the institutions are fighting it, what happens next? Because this isn't just a policy debate anymore. It's the beginning of a much larger political war, one that will decide who truly holds power in American democracy. When you zoom out from the immediate drama, the press conferences, the union meltdowns, the headlines, something much bigger comes into focus. This moment with Zohran Mamdani and the police union isn't an isolated conflict. It's part of a deeper pattern that has shaped American power for decades. Institutions resisting any challenge to their authority, no matter how small, no matter how reasonable. Because here's the truth. Powerful institutions, whether they are police unions, intelligence agencies, massive corporations, or bureaucratic agencies, all respond the same way when transparency threatens their dominance. They circle the wagons. They escalate the rhetoric. They frame accountability as an attack. They try to convince the public that any oversight will lead to chaos, not because it's true, but because it protects their position. We've seen this movie before. Think about big banks during the 2008 crisis. The moment oversight was proposed, they warned it would cripple the economy. Think about large tech companies when lawmakers questioned privacy abuses. They warned regulation would destroy innovation. Think about fossil fuel giants when climate transparency rules came up. They warned the country would collapse without them. And now, police unions use the same playbook. Accountability equals danger. Transparency equals instability. Oversight equals disrespect. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. And when you connect that strategy to the broader themes of democracy and citizenship, the picture becomes even clearer. Democracies only function when the public can trust that institutions serve them honestly. But trust requires transparency. Trust requires accountability. When institutions block transparency, they block democracy. And when that happens, citizens start to lose faith in the justice system, in political leadership, in the idea that power can ever be fair. History is filled with examples of this tension. COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret program that spied on civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and ordinary citizens, was justified as national security. But the truth only came out because activists broke into an FBI office and exposed the files. The NYPD's Stop and Frisk program was defended for years as effective policing, until data proved it disproportionately targeted Black and Latino communities and had minimal effect on crime. Even the Pentagon Papers, another moment where the government insisted everything was fine, revealed a pattern of officials lying to the public while sending young Americans to war. Every one of those episodes shares the same DNA: institutions protecting themselves, even at the expense of the public they claim to serve. So when you watch the police union melt down over a basic transparency bill, understand, this isn't new. This is how entrenched power behaves when it feels cornered. But here's what is new: the cultural shift happening right now. More people are questioning authority. More people expect institutions to earn trust, not demand it. More voters, especially younger ones, want leaders who challenge power instead of catering to it. And that's where Mamdani becomes symbolic. He represents a new political class, people who aren't afraid of unions, or corporations, or bureaucratic backlash. People who are challenging the assumption that institutions should always get the final word. And maybe that's why this fight mattered so much. Because it forces us to ask the uncomfortable question: who gets to define justice in modern America? The public, or the institutions that claim to protect them? This moment isn't just about policing. It's about whether transparency is a threat or a right. About whether democracy is performative or real. And about whether Americans are finally ready to reclaim the power that was always supposed to belong to them. And if the answer to that last question is yes, then the battle we just witnessed is only the beginning.